Hi everybody, we're going to look at the principles of art today and just review them. So we're going to go through and re-look at the definitions and examples of what we mean by these principles. So here they are. Here's our description and actual definition of the principles of art and what we've looked at in Art 1. So starting off, we're going to jump right into balance. So balance is how you're distributing those visual elements in the work of art, which really means where you're putting the subject matter, the stuff on your piece of paper, and whether it's evenly spread across that paper, or whether it's asymmetrical, or it's radiating out from a center point for radial symmetry. So here are examples of both where it comes from and it out there in the world in terms of people using it when they design and create something. So of course, that's the definition for symmetrical balance. And here it is showing up in, of course, the Taj Mahal. Here it is showing up in works of art where we have artists playing with this idea of it doesn't have to be exactly symmetrical, meaning this side looks exactly like the other side, but yet it's evenly balanced. And in all three of these artists have done that. Here we have the idea of asymmetrical balance, where we have artists playing with this idea of I'm going to leave a large portion of my composition kind of with empty space and not a lot going on, and really draw your attention off to one side in some way with what's being created and put down on that piece of paper. Then we're going to move to radial symmetry. So radial symmetry originates really from nature, actually. We find it in many, many things out there in the natural world. And it's when things are arranged around a central point and they radiate out from that center point. Here's an example of it actually being used in things that people have created. So we have a mandala and we have this set of doors. So that is our radial symmetry. Moving into emphasis, our next principle of art, that is where one part stands out above all others and grabs our attention. There's many different ways to do that. We can play with, for instance here, line. So he just increases line weight and draws our attention to this creature as opposed to it all being just a squiggly mess of the same thickness of line. It really would make a much different piece if this wasn't a thick, bold line. And also highlighting the side of her. And then you can also create emphasis through use of color. That is another way to play with that idea where we have some, different colors, neutral tones with these bright pops of our, Roy G. Biv color spectrum grabbing our attention. So moving from emphasis to contrast, this is, of course, where you're creating opposites in some way, right? So whether it's light versus dark value or colors, visual textures, shapes and forms are changing size and scale. These are different things you can do. So here artists have really played with that idea of light and dark, right? Where you have a very strong light source and we have this extreme light and dark happening. It makes for a very more dynamic painting than if it had just been all well lit. Here we have a contemporary collage artist who, she plays with just the textures of her papers to really draw out the elements that she wants to in her pieces. In this one, we have the actual visual texture of actually kind of seeing the actual object in the photograph collage itself. And then here, just plain color paper being broken up. So we have that contrast of seeing the actual image from the magazine cut out versus just paper that she's manipulated by ripping up for just color. So moving into movement, this is how your eye moves around that artwork, where you're being led through it in some way because of some of the things the artist has played with. Van Gogh here has played with the sense of line and broken dashed lines and changing the color and value of the line to really bring us through this composition, following these swirls of kind of the energetic sky to the glowing moon over here, right? And Herring has done a similar thing, but in a very different way, where he's used bold color and the idea of kind of silhouetted, simple people running across this arched, bigger form of this person. And it grabs your attention because of that. Also with these kind of lines mimicking the idea of movement and running. So moving to our next principle of art, we have repetition. This is where you repeat some element, whether it's color, whether it's shape. Repetition can either be where it's repeated in exactly the same way, or there's some variation, like here, where we do have repetition of the idea of these forms, but each paper cutout is very different. Not very different, but differs from each other in terms of no one is exactly the same. But it's similar enough we can say he repeated them. The same with this abstract painting, where we have repetition of these concentric circles, but because they're hand-drawn, they are not perfect at all, and none of them are exact. So we have, a small amount of range of variety within this repetition to make it interesting, but it still is repetition. So then we move into proportion, which is, this idea that it's the relationship of the parts to the whole, where, what are the proportions that are happening as we look at the whole person, and then we compare like the head to the body, or the arms to the body, or the arms to the legs. What has happened with it can either be realistic or it can be distorted and played with for creative purposes, and also to, create some more maybe perhaps depth of meaning. Here we have an example of proportion that's accurate, right? That looks like people you can find out there walking around. Here we have an artist who did the exact opposite, and he made the choice to play with proportion and really distort it for really creative effect. He wanted to tell a story and give us some more ideas about this person and send a message with how he plays with the proportion of this figure. Then we come to our last principle of art, which is unity. And that really is the idea that everything that you've done and put into that work of art is coming together and it works with each other. It's all talking and having a nice conversation, and somehow it feels complete. I'm going to throw this question out there and end with this, because I always do when I present the principles of art. Does something have to be beautiful to be unified? So can something be a unified work of art but not have beauty? That's an interesting question, and it leads us back to that question I asked a couple weeks ago about what is art, how you define that, but it's something to think about. So you can refer back to this video when you need to, and it's here for your reference.